Hey, welcome to a special edition of Horsepower we're calling the Battle of the Big Blocks. A Ford 460 versus a Chevy 454. When we showed you budget and performance buildups of each of these engines during the past year, well, we got a ton of requests for program copies.
So here they are, packed into one show. Now Ford goes first, and we were out to get as much power as possible on a lean budget, from the junkyard and onto the engine dyno. Here it is, the junkyard starting point of a budget engine build. Now what is it? Well, it's a 385 series engine, which was Ford's last attempt at a production big block.
There went ahead. Because of their long production run from 68 to 96, well-worn 460 motors are plentiful and pretty cheap compared to Ford FEs.
Here we go.
We found this one for $200 at a local boneyard.
Oh, that's nice.
During an engine teardown, you can learn a lot about how an engine ran and how well it was treated. For example, hammered rod bearings are signs of hard use and abuse.
Top floor.
Even a budget motor build involves a trip to the machine shop, and even good blocks will need a little work. Now, if you're reusing the crank like us, you'll probably need to have the journals polished. But you can save money by doing some of the work yourself, like reconditioning reusable rods. Our bill at the machine shop, which included reconditioning these iron heads, was about $500, kind of what we expected. So we're reusing everything here, including the rods we've pre-assembled. So everything over here is either a factory replacement or came from comp cams for about $800. So with the block, the machining, and the parts, so far we're at $1,500, not too shabby.
We also painted the block ourselves to save a few extra bucks. Now we're gonna go ahead and install some freeze plugs. Now here's a little tip. I see a lot of people just drop these into place and press them in. Well, that can cause water seepage. So we're gonna use a little Loctite retaining compound, which will take care of that leak. Now using a socket slightly smaller than the freeze plug, tap it into place. Awesome. Here's a stock spring, and here's one of the new ones we got from Comp Cams. Now it's a little bit taller and it has a higher spring rate, and check this out. Down inside there's a dampener, and that keeps the spring from wobbling at higher RPMs.
Our new cam's a Comp hydraulic flat tappet with a 494 gross valve lift on both intake and exhaust. Now this thing has a broad power band, and for you guys that love to hear them dance, you got a very noticeable idle. Okay, now for the induction on our big block. This original cast iron intake manifold is not only heavy, comes up way short in the plenum volume department. Now our YN replacement's lightweight aluminum, 37 pounds lighter, and the extra volume, well, it's going to add up to a broad power band from 1,500 to 6,000 RPMs.
Our 460 big block came with an old points type distributor. We could replace it with a new high dollar piece, but instead we're going to save about $130 with a little upgrade from Pertronics.
To pinch your pennies on a budget bill, you got to reuse as many original parts as possible, and for us that means things like this timing cover, even the water neck, and oh, since we like the looks of these old valve covers, well, they're on the list too. After 30 minutes of this, your arm may be numb, but keep thinking about all the money you're saving.
We're dumping our 460's exhaust into some headers we got from Flowtech. The pipes measure 1 3/4 inches and feed into a 3-inch collector.
Summit Racing's just come out with a new street strip carburetor that's perfect for this project. They got 3 versions. We got the 750 CFM version with a manual choke and mechanical secondaries, and at $330, it sure fit our budget.
Ready?
Just for reference, factory 460s after 79, like ours, had a horsepower rating of 215.
Man, for a motor that was a dog back in the day, this thing's making 493 foot-pounds at 3,400, 378 horsepower at 4,700 RPM.
Hey, I'm pretty happy, and we only spent a shade over $2,300. That's pretty low budget. We'll see how the bow tie budget build stacks up to this coming up. Welcome back to Horsepower. We kicked off our battle of the big blocks by building and dynoing a Ford 460 on a tight budget of about $2,500.
Now it's time for its bow tie counterpart, a Chevy 454.
For the budget build, we cleaned up these cast iron heads, then went into the Summit catalog for a build sheet of affordable parts, like these pulleys, aluminum intake manifold, basic dress-up kit, and a hydraulic flat tappet lifter and cam set with an operating range of 25 to 5,500 RPM. Now, duration at 50 thousandths is 228 and 238.
Then a stock replacement double roller timing set. But wait, we haven't talked about budget. For the old motor, we shelled out $250. Then our machining bill came to $700, and we spent $1,350 on parts. So we're at $2,300, which is about $200 under the Ford budget.
Well, we're getting really close to seeing how this bow tie motor stacks up to its blue oval counterpart. Any predictions?
Man, you always put me on the spot. You know, these things are built pretty identical. I'd be scared to say, but I will tell you this. I think they're gonna make within 20 horsepower of each other.
I bet the Chevy guys are hoping that.
Yep. Well, they've got a shot with this Mallory HEI distributor that has a billet housing. Plus, we're using a set of their Pro Sidewinder 8mm wires. To keep the playing field level, we're using the same 750 CFM Summit carb we used on the Ford build.
That'll keep it burning up.
All right, Joe, you want to give it, fire it up?
Now, since it's loaded with a hydraulic flat tappet valve train, break-in oil and some runtime is mandatory to avoid scarring the camshaft. Purring. Think we'll make the Chevy guys happy or not?
I hope so.
Let's see.
I like when everybody's happy.
Oh, 407.
I'm liking these numbers.
I can't believe it.
I'm liking these numbers.
This motor is ready for $5 grand. And I bet you Blue Oval fans are ready to kick the TV. Take heart though, I'm partial to Fords myself, but you gotta hand it to this 454 combination.
Steady.
409, but it may have peaked out. Well, maybe not, but that's enough salt in the wounds for one day. After crunching the numbers, here's how the two budget big blocks stacked up against each other. As you can see, Chevy runs away with it. 31 more horsepower than the budget version of the 460, and ironically, 31 more foot-pounds of torque. That's two motors with just about the same size block and similar parts packages. Next, the gloves come off for Ford and Chevy performance builds. The best and baddest is yet to come.
Welcome back to Horsepower and our battle of the big blocks. Now you just saw the results of our big inch Ford and Chevy engines after similar budget builds. Now it's time to get a little more serious.
You bet. Here's what happens when we swap some of those budget parts for performance bolt-ons in search of big streetable horsepower numbers. Once again, Ford goes first. The stock cast iron crank and rods and replacement pistons are going to be stout enough to handle the upgrades we got in store, but we can definitely help it out with this. It's a trick flow stud girdle that really is going to beef up those 2-bolt main caps. On top, the valve covers come off, as well as the dual plane intake we installed during our budget build. That's because we're replacing it with this, a trick flow track heat single plane intake designed for big block Fords operating in the 3,500 to 8,000 RPM range.
For more power and better valve train geometry, we're getting rid of the stamped steel rocker arms for a set of these new trick flows that have a 1.73 rocker ratio. They also have needle bearing fulcrums and a relief cut in the front for more valve spring clearance. TrickFlow's aluminum power ports are a perfect match for our new intake. Now these things have 290cc intake runners and 74cc combustion chambers, and that's compared to 91s in the factory head, so we are going to have a higher compression ratio. For the exhaust ports, check this out. These things are a night and day difference over the factories. Take a look over here. On these, the air has to flow up and around and then down to escape. Now the TrickFlow ports are raised from the stock location to allow a lot better airflow.
To keep our heads in place, we're replacing the head bolts with ARP studs. It's very important to only install them finger tight. That way the studs only stretch on their vertical axis. This hydraulic flat tappet camshaft was a good choice for a budget-minded performance setup, but not for our new power plant. In fact, in its place is going this comp hydraulic roller that was spec'd out for us by engine builder John Consi. Now, the gross valve lift of this flat tappet is 494 compared to 685 here, and you can see the different shapes of the lobes and why this one's going to hold the valves open longer. Duration at 50 thousandths lift is 256 on the intake, 264 on the exhaust side.
The next pieces in our valve train are these Comp Cams hydraulic roller lifters soaked in oil. Now I went ahead and called Comp Cams in order to set a high-tech 3/8 push rods that measure in at 8/200. With the rocker arms in place, I'm going to adjust the valves a half a turn past zero lash.
Are you ready?
If you want old style looks with new technology, Holley has taken the 4150 to the new level with the 4150 HP. Now this thing has cast main bodies without any choke horns and down leg style boosters. On the bottom side, it's got stainless steel throttle plates and it even comes with screw-in air bleeds. Now one of the cool user-friendly features are the Dominator style fuel bowls you can plumb from either side. Now we got ours in 1000 CFM.
All right, man, we all primed up?
Already, prime time, baby.
Okay, we got a hoedown for this thing. I'm not talking about a barn dance down south, you know.
Here you go. You got to get it in first, though.
I know it. There we go.
The motor's warmed up, and hey, we're pumped up. But we're going to walk before we run too hard. First with a 5,000 RPM pull for 533 horsepower.
Yeah, we're definitely not close to peak. So after a few more runs and some more timing, we're ready to see what happens at $6 grand.
$596.
Well,
all right, let's see.
That's pretty close.
Yeah.
But this ain't horseshoes. Surely we can make 600. Now we're going to see what happens with lighter springs that came with our distributor and another 1.5 degrees of timing.
There it is.
All right.
Good job. Not just 600, but 607.
You're watching Horsepower. For a DVD copy of this episode, just go to PowerBlockTV.com and order your copy for just $5.95 plus shipping and handling. Start your own Horsepower collection, delivered right to your door from the Power Block.
All right, it's time for the final phase of our Chevy versus Ford big block shootout. Let's see what happens when, like the Ford, our Chevy bow-tie engine gets a performance build-up.
Now it's going to get a similar package of all the high performance parts, and when it's all over, we're going to see which classic power plant gets to wear the crown. To match the Ford's power, we've got a similar parts combination, like this solid roller cam, except this time it's from Lunati. For cylinder heads, we're using a Racing Head Service big block Chevy aluminum head. And for the induction side, a Merlin single plane intake manifold. Now for the rotating assembly, we're going to do something a little different. We're going to hang these KB pistons on a set of Eagle rods and use one of their crankshafts. Now this is our ESP cast steel piece that's good for applications up to 700 horsepower. It's been cross-drilled on all of the rod throws for reduced rotating mass, and they even balance the entire assembly for us.
Now, you might remember we reused the Ford crank because they were known to handle 700 horsepower stock. Chevys, well, only about 500 horsepower.
The rods from our kit are forged from 5140 steel, and they're available with a press fit or like ours with floating pins. The pistons are KB's Icon brand, made from 2618 forged aluminum alloy with a raised dome and single valve relief. This will help put our compression ratio at about 10.5 to 1.
A solid roller puts more stress on the valve train and requires frequent valve adjustment, but the upside is you can get a more aggressive cam profile and higher RPM range. Needless to say, cylinder head choice was pretty critical in both of our big block builds. For the Chevy, we're going with these RHS aluminum heads with 320cc intake runners compared to 290s on the Ford. Valves measure a 225 on the intake, 188 on the exhaust, a little bit bigger than the Fords, but get this, combustion chambers. These are 114 cc's, the Fords were 74, so how could they have the same compression ratio of 10.5? But don't forget, we got those big dome pistons taking up a lot of space in here. We are swapping out the springs that came with the heads, though, for these comp dual springs with dampeners. Now, they've got twice the spring rate, and they're a perfect match for that solid roller cam.
The rest of the valve train came from Lunati, including the roller lifters. Because of our parts combination, we have to measure the push rods to get the correct length. And just because we have to wait to get them in the morning, doesn't mean we're dead in the water.
In fact, we can install this Merlin single plane intake we got from World Products now. It's one a lot of racers are using these days. It makes good power in the 25 to 8,500 RPM range, and they use what's called a right cast process, which means they smooth out the internals so there's no need to clean up the runners or the plenum. It's ready to go on.
We can do the rest of our work today in the dyno. We're reusing this 1000 CFM Holly, which is the same carb we ran on the second stage with the Ford during its dyno runs.
Well, I'm happy to say the push rods we ordered came in just in time. And just because they're new doesn't mean they're ready to use right out of the box. Machining material can get lodged inside these things, and unless it's removed, it can actually block oil from getting to the top of the engine. Well, after dropping them in place, we finish up the valve train with these 1.7 ratio rocker arms.
To get started, we're running the engine through a heat cycle to get the ring seated and all the components broke in. God, I love the sound of these big blocks. Sounds phenomenal. We're up to 615 horsepower at 6,500 RPM. But we're not done. Lately, we've enjoyed impressive results from changing to lighter distributor springs.
Oh, yeah. Now, before you Chevy guys start slapping high fives, let's look at peak runs of each engine stacked up against each other. This is horsepower, the bright whitest Chevy, peaking at 6,300 RPM, 11 more horsepower than the Ford that flattened out here at 5,900. Torque is a different story, though. This is the Chevy bright green down here, and the Ford making 11 more foot-pounds. So who's the winner? Well, we better call it a tie between two classic big blocks, now loaded with the best of new and old world high performance. See you next time.